Let's talk a little bit about our guest tonight. Christopher Penczak is a teacher, writer, and healing practitioner. His practice draws upon the foundation of both modern and traditional witchcraft, blended with the wisdom of mystical traditions from across the globe, and a practitioner and teacher of shamanism, tarot, Reiki healing, herbalism, astrology, and the Kabbalah. He is the founder of the Temple of Witchcraft Tradition and a system of magical training based upon the material of his books and classes. He is an ordained minister, primarily serving the New Hampshire and Massachusetts pagan and metaphysical communities through public rituals, private counseling, and teaching. Though he travels extensively teaching throughout the United States, he is the author of over 15 books and CDs, most recently The Mighty Dead. For more information on Christopher, visit his website at Christopher Penczak, and that's PENCZAK.com. Welcome, Christopher.
Hello, how are you?
I'm thrilled to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, tonight I want to talk about what this particular subject I found was just so fascinating. The plant. Let's talk a little bit about the plant spirit familiar. Can you explain to our listeners what a familiar is and what a plant spirit familiar would be?
Sure. A familiar is an old term used in the witchcraft traditions for a spirit that aids you. A lot of times today what we call a spirit guide might have been called a familiar spirit. It literally means a spirit that's familiar to you and that you're familiar to it. It acts as an intermediary, what's sometimes called a go-between. As the term kind of changed for a lot of people, they started thinking of familiars as animal guides, very similar to what people think of as totem animals. So a lot of people are familiar with this idea that everybody has a totem animal that guides them and protects them and helps heal them. And in the medieval witchcraft traditions, and when people talked about the trials against the witches and persecuting the witches, they would say one of the signs of a witch was having a strong relationship with some type of animal. And we believe that they had not only a strong relationship with that animal, but an animal spirit that goes with it. So that became the witch's familiar. So it's kind of like the idea of the black cat or the hare or the toad or the raven.
Mm-hmm.
And a plant spirit familiar is kind of like the idea that certain people who are attracted to plant magic and plant spirituality can have a plant spirit ally. So it's an actual intelligence from a plant, but that plant, just like an animal, can act as an intermediary. And just like an animal has a certain quality to it that helps bring blessings to a person, the plant will have a certain quality to it that can bring blessings to a person.
So you do believe that these spirits and familiars, they have a vibration similar to the animal kingdom, or is it different? Is it more like is it a stronger vibration? Does it contain memory?
I think it definitely contains memory. I think it is different, though. We kind of divide things into the orders of intelligence. So there's mineral life, there's plant life, and there's animal life. So humans would be in the animal life, and so we have the most in common with animals. So we have the most familiarity and resonance with animals. So their vibrations are similar to ours, so we can communicate their energies and their medicines a little bit better. So I think everybody has an animal totem or an animal familiar, but not everybody has a plant familiar. You'll notice some people have a green thumb, or some people will have this connection and draw to the forest and to, all things that are green and might raise herbs and want to do herbal magic and herbal medicine. Those people are usually called to work with plant spirits. And in working with plant spirits, they're a little bit of a different vibration. They're a different intelligence. They connect to nature spirits in a way that are different from creatures of flesh and blood, but they have their own lessons. They have quite literal medicine to them, like herbs, but they also have a spirit medicine to them. So that spirit medicine can help heal us or teach us or transform us.
So in that way, then, perhaps just like familiars, if it was an animal familiar or an animal spirit helper, do you believe that you can be chosen by different plants and attracted
Absolutely.
by different plants?
Absolutely. I think certain plants choose you, and I think certain times you can ask to work with certain plants. I believe in the teachings that we put across in our temple, the idea that there's three main types of plant spirits that you can work with. They're the healing plants that are called balms. So they're the spices in your spice rack, and they're the herbs at the herb store. But generally, when you work with their energies, they bolster your life force. They make you healthier. They make you stronger. Then there's the banes, and the banes are the poisonous plants. And a lot of people are afraid of the poisonous plants, but their spirits are really great teachers in initiation. A lot of the great metaphysical initiations in the old temples, they're about contemplating life and death. And so the poisonous plants help us understand spirit through life and death. And each one has its different type of teaching to it. And then there's tree teachers. And the tree teachers are like the old wise ones in the forest. They've been around the longest. They keep the deepest memories. They keep the songs of the earth. And they can teach you how to be a priest or priestess of the forest. So depending on what type of spirit you're attracted to, and you can have a plant spirit ally in all three of those categories. One can help you stay healthy, one can bring you into the mysteries, and one can be kind of a guiding mentor to be a priest or priestess.
That is so fascinating because we get so far away from the plants. And if you look back, like especially with the Druids, they were all about, you know, the trees and the different significance of the different trees and all the different plants. And we've gotten so far away from it that you live in the city. What do you know of that? You know, you almost have to go backwards. But do you believe that we contain memories within us of our past lives when we have worked with trees and we have worked with the banes and the balms?
Absolutely. I think we carry both soul memory and we carry memory in our blood. So I think all our ancestors at one time were all connected to some group of people that used plant medicine. And then likewise, we have this sense of global memories of different incarnations where we might have worked in societies and in ancient worlds that, you know, were really much more in tune than we are today. But I think even if you're in a city today, you'll be amazed at what you can find. You know, just growing up through the cracks in the street, you know, growing wild in the parks, you know, the plants can't be contained. And there's so many magical plants that you can find and you'd probably think that are just weeds. And if you get a good plant ID book or if you walk with somebody who knows, you can find that there's all sorts of spirit helpers out there that you might be ignoring up until now. So nature's all around us. We're always in nature, even when we're in the city, even when we're, you know, surrounded by concrete. It finds a way.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because in your books and the information about your books, it talks about herbalism. And I know that there is a difference between herbology and traditional herbalism. Can you explain a little bit about the background of traditional herbalism? I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
Right. Well, I think in the end, the difference is kind of artificial between the two. I think people who use the word herbology more often are also looking a lot at the science of things. But I think a lot of the people who do the traditional folk medicine and herbalism, while they might not be as educated in the biochemistry and the molecular science, a lot of what they're doing is supported by that, you know. So I think it's an artificial line, and you know, I know herbalists who've learned more of the science, and I know scientists who've learned a little bit more of the folk medicine to make it practical. So, but I think in the end, the traditional medicine is about really working with not just the spirit of the plant, but each plant has a nature to it. You know, there's chemicals in all the plants that, you know, we don't understand what they do for the plants, but we know what they do inside people, and we know what they do inside of animals. So in my mind, in the evolution of nature and spirit, you know, the plants want to be eaten. The plants want to be used as medicine. The plants want to integrate with human consciousness and animal consciousness and, you know, really have that partnership, because a lot of the chemicals really just seem to be healing aspects. So why would they have that for their evolution? There must be some type of symbiosis that's going on there. And in traditional herbalism, you know, we're really looking to understand what are the patterns, you know, what does an herb look like it does? What is its coloring? What is it associated with astrologically? And we use those associations to figure out how it works in the body. Like a lot of herbs that are associated with Jupiter are actually liver tonics, and in astrology, Jupiter rules over the liver. So, you know, it's a one way to kind of do diagnosis. Some people do diagnosis by astrology in very traditional kind of medieval forms. Others will, you know, go by symptoms. Some will go by, you know, skin color and pallor and do different types of diagnoses. But it's very similar. The Western herbal tradition is very similar to what people think of as Chinese traditional medicine and Ayurveda in India. It's just the problem is it's not been codified. It didn't survive in a kind of more scientific form. You know, and a lot of the modern medicine replaced it in Europe. And so we were really out of touch with our natural forms of medicines in the West.
We are, and that's fascinating to add the planetary associations in there. And there's planetary associations and astrological associations. And how does that integrate? Like, for example, a person's horoscope. We had kind of touched on that in some shows before, but never really, gone into it. Like in a person's horoscope chart, of course, you're going to have their aspects and their place, their planetary placements and their astrological signs. And these all have, and the herbs all have planetary, they have associations with all of that, don't they?
Right. Yes, they do. Yep, they have associations with the four elements, which is a part of astrology. They have associations with the planets. Traditionally in classical astrology, they use 7 planets, but you can expand it with the modern planets. And they have astrological sign associations. So there's parts in your astrology chart that tell you a bit about your health. So when something's transiting through, let's say, the 6th house, the 6th house is daily health. So if you decide that, there's something going on and someone's not feeling well, I'll always look to see, what's going on to their 6th house, or relationship to their 6th house. And that might give me an idea of what planet and, what that planet's about. So that planet might tell me, oh, this is the system that might be going out of whack for that person, and give me an idea of some of the herbs that I might be able to use to help them. And it also corresponds to a lot of the mental, emotional things that we associate with the planets and signs. So if someone's feeling upset, digestive system, an upset stomach, what else is influenced by that astrology to make me think, they upset emotionally, are they upset mentally, is this a work issue, is this a family issue? And it can give you a good dialogue to really kind of get to the root of what's causing illness for the person.
Yes, because healing is a holistic thing, mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Absolutely. You got to look at the whole picture of the person.
You have to. That's true. So, do you believe that if you are communicating with or you have a good rapport with the different plants as an herbologist or, as an herbalist, that these plant spirits, if you work with them, they can aid in bringing about healing? So what are some of the ways? Is it by ritual? Is it by actually creating formulas? That you can aid in healing with that?
Both of them. I think the first thing you need to do when you work with the plant spirit is to get to know the plant. So by growing the plant, observing how it grows, observing what it needs, getting in touch with its scent and its taste, incorporate it into your life, making it into a tea, making it into a tincture, taking it into your body so you can communicate with it a little bit better. Sometimes in visionary work and meditations, or what people consider to be like shamanic journeying with drums, you can have a visionary experience and communicate with the spirit of the plant. And it might literally tell you something, or it might tell you something by showing you something in your mind's eye, or you might get a feeling come over you. But there's this whole idea that herbalism came about from a scientific perspective through trial and error, and people had no idea what the herbs were used for, and so you got sick with, whatever the illness was. You went to the old wise woman, and she'd give you something, and she'd observe how it worked, and if it worked, she remembered that, and if it didn't work, she'd, not use that. But there's so many poisonous plants out there, too. I think the wise woman would have killed a lot of people. So if you're in a village where the wise woman killed somebody,
oh, no.
You're going to go back to her. So if you talk to anybody at an indigenous level of kind of tribal culture today, if you go into the Amazon, if you go to parts of Central America, parts of Africa, and you say, how'd you learn these really complex ideas about the chemistry of the plants? They'll say the plants told them, or Mother Earth told them, or the jungle told them. So there's that communication once you're, in rapport with the plant spirit. It'll tell you how to use it. A good herbalist who's connected to a particular plant might find that they can get a particular plant to do something that's not traditionally on the books, and then they may find that, they have one plant that they add to everything, because even though it's not supposed to be used for particular things, but just that plant is powerful for them and it adds to the magic. And then you'll find that, in different tribes, even in America, if you look at different native tribes, they had some of the same plants, but they might have used the plant for different reasons. So that plant had a different relationship with those people. Some used echinacea. A lot of people are familiar with echinacea today,
right,
as an immune support. You take it when you think you're going to get sick. Others used it as an anti-venom. It draws out venom from snake bites, or insect bites. So, it depends on what the tribe or the person or the healer's relationship is with that plant.
So if a person was going to start working with herbs, just, in the very beginning, what would you recommend how a person gets started? Like grow a little garden and try to listen to them and meditate?
I think with the plant spirits, I would
Yes.
start by growing a little garden, even just a little pot garden, a container garden in your porch. It doesn't have to be, deeply elaborate. But choose some of the healing herbs, or choose some of the magical herbs. Really do the research to make sure you know what's poisonous and what's not. And that the things that are not poisonous, make very basic medicines of them, make very basic tonics. Like a great one to start, because it's one of my allies, so I always like to, give it a little PR, is lemon balm. Lemon balm is part of the mint family. It's very, very gentle. You can have the tea just for fun and flavor. It's not going to have such a strong medicine that it's going to affect you in a deep way. But it's a great supportive herb. It makes everything bright. It makes everything cheerful. So, and it's very easy to grow. So grow a pot of lemon balm, meditate a little bit with it, drink a cup of its tea, and really kind of get in tune with it. And then once you have a feel for some of the plants, you can get a little bit more intricate. If you're somebody who's a ritualist, you can do rituals with them. If you like to do any type of shamanic journey or deeper meditation, you can meditate with the pot of plant by you, and or out in your garden if you're growing it out in the garden. But it's the idea of kind of getting in touch with the earth. I'm a big believer in meditation, so I think a great skill to have, whether you're involved in plants or not, is to be able to quiet yourself and to go within, and to be able to quiet yourself and go within near a plant or leaning up against a tree or in the garden, really opens you up to those intelligences.
Well, meditation really is the key in all of our work, isn't it?
Yeah,
we really need to.
I'm a great advocate of that.
It's like you can't. That's how I think all of us, psychics, healers, practitioners, if we can't get in there and we don't get in tune, then we might as well not even do it, right?
Right. Well, I think being able to control whether you can get into that altered state or not is what the basic skill for all those things is. Whether you apply it towards mediumship, whether you apply it towards reading cards, whether you apply it towards plant magic, you have to be able to communicate with the universe somehow, and I think quieting the mind is a key.
And the plants can definitely, like people meditate, and in their visualizations, a lot of times plants are involved. Have you noticed that? Trees, you're in a meadow, you're in grass. It's like nature embraces you through this.
Absolutely. I think nature calls us back and wants us to be connected.
It really, because it is all about the interconnection. And I know we could go so far with all these. There's so many ways the herbs are prepared, and the different types, the roots, the flowers, the stems, all of that. Now, the ancient Egyptians, they were the ones that they're kind of known as the forerunners of aromatherapy. And
right.
So I have a question about you with the aromatherapy and the plant spirits. Do you believe that the aromatherapy oils contain that spirit in there? Because the ancients did.
Absolutely. I mean, the essentially what an essential oil is the volatile chemicals of a plant. It's what makes that plant unique.
It's like a life force, huh?
Yeah, exactly. When you think of breath, so many cultures look at breath as what carries life force. Like in India, they call prana and pranayama as breathing exercises, and prana is the life force you take in. So whatever you're smelling when you're taking in that life force, I think life force is transmitted across the air. At least it's one way to transmit life force. So when you distill like the powerful chemicals, which is really a powerful aspect of their life force, into a little bottle, I think it definitely carries, because it's the unique signature of that plant. On one hand, the essential oils have that kind of concentrated power to it. I'm also a big advocate of what are called flower essences or vibrational remedies.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'm not real familiar with that. Aromatherapy, but not the flower essences so much.
Yeah, it's the other end of the spectrum. So where aromatherapy has very concentrated chemicals, and there's some dangers with the aromatherapy in the sense there's certain chemicals that can burn you, or there's certain chemicals, the flower essential oils that you shouldn't have if you're pregnant because they can cause a spontaneous abortion. On the other side of the spectrum is the flower essences. The flower essences are made by soaking flowers in water, and then there's a method to preserve them. And when you measure them out for doses, you measure them out by drops, and you keep on diluting them. So there's very little chemical to it, but the idea is that the spirit of the flower gets imprinted upon the water. The beauty of it is that it has a lot of magic, and it has a lot of what we consider the vibration of the plant, but it doesn't have a lot of the chemical to it. So you don't have to worry about interactions if you're on any type of medication. You don't have to worry about overdosing and making somebody toxic with it. They can have very profound spiritual vibrational effects, but just like carrying a crystal is not going to cause you to have an interaction through medicine. It's the same thing with the flower essences. It works in a very similar way to carrying crystals and stones. but it's plant energy rather than stone energy.
It sounds almost like a plant energy homeopathy type of an approach.
It's actually it's a step away from homeopathy. The gentleman who really made it famous in the modern era was a homeopath. His name was Dr. Bach, but usually people say his name is K-H and think Bach. But he's put out a line of flower essences that you can get, at any health food store. But a lot of people don't realize you can make your own, and I find that very empowering. So you just kind of basically, get a bowl of water and you soak the flowers under, sunlight. And you can drink right from that if you're going to do a ritual, or you can preserve that water with a little bit of alcohol and measure it out. And it's a little bit more complex than that, but it's pretty simple. You don't need anything expensive. Like if you wanted to make your own essential oils, you need a whole distilling equipment and, a little bit more of a laboratory setup. With flower essences, everything you have in your kitchen can help you do it.
So you could put like some flowers in some vodka and drink it? No, I'm kidding.
Actually, that would make a tincture, but yes, you could.
It would be a spontaneous tincture, right?
All sorts of stuff, yeah.
So what is the flower essences? Now I remember the Bach, and I call them Bach, but that could be wrong. There's one called Rescue Remedy, and years ago, and he's now passed away, I had this Arabian horse that I used to go into the show ring, and he was just very high, and I would put drops of that Rescue Remedy inside an apple, and he'd eat it, and it would calm him down.
I'd have no doubt about that. I think animals respond really well to the essences.
Animals seem to, the flower essences.
Yeah, well, I think they don't have a lot of the baggage. I think people think, oh, this is not a strong chemical, or, what is this? It tastes like water. Can this really help me? They think it's a little too out there for most people. It still has an effect, but I think they still have to go through the filter of the mind, where animals are just like, they can feel the vibration, and, is this going to help them or not? If they feel it's going to help them, they're going to take it in, and they don't have to bypass all the ego stuff that we have to go through.
They're not polluted by the gobbledygook.
Yeah, in many ways.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the past life associations, or the transcending of lives of plants, and what, in your mind, because you've worked with the plant spirits a lot, what do you feel are some of the most powerful plant spirits out there, of like herbs, for example?
Most of the things that you would get, in a health food store are these power plants that fall in the balm category. And although they look innocuous, they look like little weeds. They don't look like anything that's that much to most people when they think of something powerful. They're plants that wherever they've shown up in the world, they've been recognized by the magical practitioners as having a power. Like I think of St. John's wort. St. John's wort is this very powerful, very life force, vibrant energy. But if you look at it, it looks like a little scrub weed by the side of the road. It has a little yellow flower to it, but it has such magic to it. So St. John's wort has this 5-petaled yellow flower, and if you look down at it from the top, the leaves are equal distance, and they form an equal-armed cross. And both the 5 petals, like a 5-pointed star, and the equal-armed cross are both symbols of protection. So people have recognized that it protects you from harm, it protects you from evil, it protects you from unwanted spirits, it protects you from nightmares. And it's interesting to watch the octaves of the different plants. Like what they do medicinally has a thread to what they do magically, has a thread to what they do as a healer. So, all this magic has been about protection. In the medicinal world, when it's used for really healing shock and trauma. Because usually when we feel unsafe, we feel like we've been shocked, we've been pushed out of our body, we feel like we're not connected. So the oil of St. John's wort helps with burns and helps with bruising. The tincture of it also helps calm us down. A lot of people think of St. John's wort as this kind of tranquilizing or uplifting agent because people take it when they're depressed. And really what it's doing magically and metaphysically, its power behind it, is it brings in more light. When it brings in more light to your physical body, it heals you. When it brings more light into your mental, emotional body, it lifts up depression. That kind of takes the darkness out. As a flower essence, it's great for nightmares, and it really kind of cures any type of nightmares. It's great with kids who suffer from nightmares because it makes them feel kind of invincible in their dreams, which is perfect for them. As a homeopathic remedy, it's called hypericum, and it's used for nerve damage. But there's this whole kind of thread that's going on here, whether it be tincture, tea, oil, homeopathy, flower essence, or just herbal spirit. As the spirit of it brings in more light. And the way you can tell that is if you hold a leaf of St. John's wort up to the sun, it looks like it's pierced with holes.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I've never actually seen. I don't think I've ever actually seen an actual plant. I've had the dried, but I've never
Hmm.
seen a live plant. That's very fascinating.
Right around midsummers, depending on where you are, a little bit later, a little bit before, there'll be these little kind of yellow flowers that are, less than knee high, growing by the side of the road. And if it's five-petaled flower, and if you can hold the leaf up, it's a thin leaf, and it looks like it's been pierced by a needle several times. That's
Hmm.
St. John's wort. So you might be driving by it
Wow.
all the time and not realize it.
Now, a lot of the modern medicines are derived from herbs, of course, but without the
Yep.
good stuff. So is that why there's all these side effects?
I think so myself. I mean, even in simple things that they have what we consider to be active ingredients in the plants. So as medicines, we try to synthesize the active ingredients, thinking that's all we need because that's all we really understand. But I think it's all the what I would call passive ingredients is what brings the harmony and safety to it. When we think of aspirin, aspirin comes from willow bark and the acylic acid in it. For a lot of people, when they take raw aspirin, it hurts their stomach. It gives them a little bit upset stomach, or it's very rough on the lining of the stomach. It works a lot faster because it's just that chemical to it. But if you made a tea or tincture of willow bark, I think all the other stuff that gets extracted helps it be gentler on your stomach. But
It
people
helps
want the
it go
relief
through your
instantly.
system to be absorbed.
Absolutely.
Well, we're
Well,
going to
that's how I always
pause
learned it
for
from my
like a
herbal
minute
teachers.
commercial and we'll be right back, okay?
Excellent.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at psychicaccess.com.
Okay, we're back with Christopher Penczak. And let's talk about some root fetishes and some of their history. What are root fetishes? But
Root
can you
fetishes are just like in animal totemism, you have what's called, and it sounds kind of funny, but a fetish. And the fetish is some type of physical object that can help link you to that spirit. Today we use a lot of carved stones, and a lot of native traditions, particularly from the Southwest, would use carved stones. But in other times, a fetish might be actually something from the animal. It might be a feather. It might be a bundle that has the hair of the animal in it. It might be a tooth or a bone of some sort.
a rabbit's foot or something?
Yep, wrapped up in some type of ceremonial garb, maybe wrapped in leather or wrapped in cloth in some way. And you'd use that much like people would carry stones today for metaphysical energies. You'd carry it in your pocket to connect with that energy, or a shaman might lay it on a person's body to be part of the healing process. And what we can do with root fetishes, and there's other types of plant fetishes too, but the idea of the root is the root of the power, kind of the seed of the soul of the plant is often in the root. And some particular plants have a deep power to them because they're all about the root, the medicines in the root and the powers in the root. Like one of my favorites to talk about is the mandrake plant. People are familiar from Harry Potter pulling up the mandrake plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the power of that plant is really in the root, so the leaves have some power too. And so you'd make a talisman out of the root, but it's not just a talisman like a good luck charm or something like that. It's the idea that the spirit of the plant resides in the root. When you harvest it with respect, you ask the spirit to stay with the root. There's different processes in which you have to enliven or feed the root. You might rub it with oil, or you might have to spritz it with some type of cologne or some type of tincture to it. But the idea you're constantly feeding that connection so the spirit can stay there. But by carrying it with you and using it in ceremony, it creates a living talisman or a living focus for that plant to work with you. So even when the plant is no longer in season, in the wintertime, you can still be working with the plants. You can still kind of have them. You can carry them with you wherever you go. And so whatever plant spirit you work the most with, or particularly at any given time, if you make a fetish out of it, that way you have its energy constantly with you.
So, and the mandrake kind of looks like a little man, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it looks like it has little legs, and if it grows long enough, it looks like it grows out the little arms, and it's hard to grow. I'm in the process of growing some mandrakes now, and there's different plants that they call American mandrake and British mandrake, but they're not the true mandrakes. It's a plant called mandragora that's the true, kind of looks like a man mandrake. And they're fussy. They don't like to be too hot, they don't like to be too cold, they don't like to be too wet, but you can't leave them too dry. And, I have friends that call them the emo kids of the plant world. If you stare at them too long, they cry, they drop their leaves. If you touch them too long, they cry and drop their leaves, and they sulk for a bit. You can almost think that they're dead. And I always recommend with the mandrakes, don't throw them out. Just keep watering them gently and don't overwater them. And often they'll come back. I actually had a mandrake that was just at the point where I was like, I think this is dead. I think it likes to play dead. And I went away on a trip for a week. Yeah, and it just leaves started sprouting. So it was like when I was finally not looking, it decided to come back.
And isn't there an interesting legend about harvesting the mandrake? Don't you have to use it actually screams when you pull it out of the ground, and doesn't it have to be harvested by a white dog? What's that all about? What's that whole deal?
The story of it is, and I think the truth behind it is that the mandrake is a powerful plant that doesn't like to be uprooted. So when it does, it releases a lot of energy. And it goes into that sulking period. So, as magic became more demonized over time, it was this idea that the scream of the mandrake, the energy that it released, could kill anybody who heard it. So the way it was harvested was you would have to loosen the soil around it, and there's all sorts of kind of folklore that's not necessarily true around it, like saying that it would only grow under the gallows where somebody was killed, or it would only grow at the crossroads, or only grow at a graveyard. But you'd have to kind of loosen the dirt around it and then tie to its top a string or a rope to it, and then you'd tie it to a dog. And I've not always heard that it had to be a white dog. Sometimes I've heard it had to be a black dog. But then you'd put meat of some sort just out of the reach of the dog, and then you'd leave. And the idea was the dog would uproot it, and then you could come back for it. And if the scream was going to kill anything, it would kill the dog and not you.
Oh,
no! Some would say the dog was immune because it was a creature of nature. It was only people that it would kill. But either way, you got the root from it. Now, I've unearthed mandrakes before, and nobody's died, so we know that's a folk legend. But I think it really speaks to the power
of you.
Yeah. Well, see,
have to put some flower essence in vodka first, right? And then do it.
Take a little shot and pull the mandrake out. Exactly.
I have a question from the chat room, and
sure.
It's kind of an incomplete one, but what I'm getting, it's Reggie from the chat room, and he kind of wanted to know, about the vitamins that are contained in the herbs, and if you personally get all your vitamins from the different herbs that you take.
Well, I believe the best medicine you have is your food. So I think I think more of vitamin and mineral content through the food that I take. But that being said, I'm still, a modern American living in the world, so do I always eat the best I could possibly? No, not exactly. I do sometimes take different vitamins. I'm a big believer also in kinesiology or muscle testing. So often if I'm going to take some type of health food supplement, I will test myself for it muscle-wise and just basically ask, is this vibration, is this the stuff that's in this good for me or bad? So that's kind of how I pick my supplements. So sometimes I take vitamin supplements. Sometimes I'll take herbal supplements that I haven't grown myself, or that I don't know where they've come from and I haven't made them myself, just because it's something exotic that I needed, or it was something I didn't have in stock. And there's certain herbal companies that I would trust, and certain stores that I trust that make medicines. I have a local shop where I actually studied some herbalism, and I know the people who make the medicines there, and so if I can't get something, make something myself, they're my first go-to place. And then if I have to get a commercial brand of something, there's some places that I trust to go to, and brands I trust.
And so you muscle test yourself with that too? Like if you...
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for people who have difficulty with muscle testing, you can do the same thing with a pendulum. Usually somebody does well with the pendulum, doesn't do so great with muscle testing, and vice versa. But there's a way to get a good answer, although people look at you kind of strange when you're in a store with a pendulum.
It's worth it, though, because
absolutely.
It might not be, the vibration might not be right for you. Now, what is the herbal... I hope I can say this right. Homunculus.
Homunculus. Oh, a homunculus is a alchemical treaty. It's an alchemical idea of creating life. So the original ideas of the alchemists that they were trying to, when their path to enlightenment, they're trying to become more like God. And part of one of God's qualities is to be able to create life. So the alchemist was seeking to do a lot of things that was godlike, like turning the lead into gold, producing immortality, and being able to create life. And the homunculus was how they did that. So an herbal homunculus is basically creating an herbal vessel, kind of like a root fetish, but a little bit more complex, a little bit more powerful. You might be making a spirit based on several different plant spirits. Usually it's created in a jar or some other type of vessel or container. Usually there's a liquid, which could be vodka, depending on what you're using. But it could be any alcohol that's a preservative, really. And you'd put that as part of the bottle, and you'd put different herbs in as if you're going to make a tincture. But through the process of ritual, you're asking all the herbs to come together as a spirit, or even if it's a single herb, asking that spirit to come out and asking it to do a particular work for you. So you might create an herbal homunculus of protective herbs and set it aside with instructions to protect your home or to protect your business. Or different plants that might not always be available. You can make a single herb, it's almost like a genie in a bottle, sometimes how it's perceived, because when you want to work with the spirit, then you open up that bottle. I have one in my practice for the spirit of pokeweed, and pokeweed is a really powerful plant to stimulate change when people are stuck. Sometimes it's explosive change, so I don't use it all the time, but if I have a client that is really stuck, that we've tried a lot of different things, they can't kind of move through it, I'll bring out the pokeweed homunculus, the pokeweed bottle. And they're not taking it herbally, because the pokeweed can be toxic, but a whole ritual went into making it. And so in a healing session, I will open up the pokeweed bottle, and I'll ask the spirit of the pokeweed to pass through that person and to help them get unstuck. And I would say 99% of the time it works, sometimes a little too well. Sometimes the person gets unstuck too quickly. But it gets things moving when things are stagnant. I also notice it starts to get things moving in my life too, so I use it with care.
That's fascinating. Now, in creating these herbal tinctures and the homunculus and all of the preparations, will you be using the dried herbs or the fresh herbs?
It depends on each case. I try to use, depending on what the type of medicine is that I'm making or the type of ritual I'm doing, I try to use fresh whenever possible. I really try to commune with the spirit of the plant if I'm making like an herbal homunculus and ask what does it want. Specifically for the pokeweed homunculus, the pokeweed bottle spirit, the actual plant that I was to make it out of that was living told me that it wanted me to do that. And it gave me specific instructions of when I was supposed to go out. I was supposed to go out under the full moon. And it wanted every part of the plant in every stage of its growth in the bottle. So it wanted part of the roots, and it wanted the leaves, and it wanted the berries, and it was in berry at this time because it was in the late summer, early fall. But it also wanted flowers, and all the flowers had passed. So I did everything that I could, and I was meditating with it, and I got the plant spirit, kept on saying it wanted the flowers, it wanted the flowers. And then almost overlaid in my mind was a map of our area, and it kind of lit up and said, that's where you're going to find flowers. It was by one of the state parks, and I found a large other pokeweed with little ones growing up around it, and the little ones that were growing up around it still had flowers to it, so I was able to get the flowers.
And so you took the fresh flowers and you put it in?
Yep, and I put it in the bottle. So the whole bottle turned almost black because pokeweed has a dark purple berry to it, almost a black berry to it. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't see the flowers, but I have this big, beautiful purple jar now, and it's got the spirit of pokeweed in all its stages.
Oh, that is completely fascinating. So you've written the book on plant spirit familiars, and then you have another herbal book. What can you tell us about that one?
Well, I don't have a specific full-on herbal book. I've got several books that have herbal magic in it. Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean the Green Lovers book? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, for a moment. Gotcha. That's actually an anthology. I didn't write it, but I was the editor and the compiler for it. It's a nice companion to the Plant Spirit Familiar book. Each chapter is a different entry by different authors, and I've done a few in there, but I'm not the sole author of it. And each entry is based on a specific plant. So it's that person, and we tried to pick people with strong relationships with particular plants and wanted to share that relationship with people. So everybody who contributed to that shared their own relationship with the plant. Some of it was very spiritual. Some of it, for some people, was very biological. For some of them, it was very medicinal. But everybody got to share their perspective on some of their favorite plants. So in that book, I wrote about lemon balm and dragon's blood and datura, I think were my big ones, in oak. And those are some of my strongest plant allies. But we have all sorts of different plants in there, and it was really great to have so many people contribute to it.
Datura, now that's a pretty powerful plant, isn't it? Datura?
It is. Datura is one of my favorites. Datura is probably my strongest ally.
So you would consider yourself a shamanistic herbal healer?
It's an uncomfortable word sometimes for people, but the word I identify the most with is witch. To me, the shamanic traditions and the European traditions evolved into what we think of as witchcraft today. I know there's a lot of stigma to it and a lot of misunderstandings around it.
There isn't to me, honey. Not
excellent.
to me.
But you never know who's listening, so I always like to, be clear with that. But, I really identify, with the word witch, but I think shamanism is a part of witchcraft. I think ceremony is a part of witchcraft. I think herbalism is a part of witchcraft. So it's the big hat that kind of fits all the things I do.
The big pointy hat, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the only other word that I really like for myself is another word people misunderstand. It's called occultist. People hear that and they get a little frightened too, but an occultist just likes to, look for things that are hidden. So that's my
That's very old school.
Yeah.
That's very Aleister Crowley-ish,
But, if you like some of the old things like, Paul Poisson's Mastering Herbalism, you'll appreciate that.
Oh, I'm dating myself. That was like one of my very first books that I found. So that's good. And I recommend it, if you ever,
it's a great
if anybody can ever get a hold of it. I think it's out of print.
He recently put out, the last couple of years, a new tarot book, and I thought that was excellent too. Really historical and technical.
I'm going to have to get that one. I don't even have that one. So tell us about some of your other books. Now, you just have put out a book called The Mighty Dead, right? That's your newest book, huh?
That was my newest book that came out in February. And through that whole process, The Mighty Dead is really about working with not just the ancestors, but working with the enlightened ancestors. So a lot of traditions talk about, like in the New Age world, people talk about the Ascended Masters, or if you're Buddhist, the Bodhisattvas, or if you're Christian, particularly Catholic, or into Christian folk magic, the saints. It is a sense of sanctified dead, the dead that have reached the next level of understanding. In the witchcraft traditions, it's called the Mighty Dead. Another name for it sometimes is called the Hidden Company. And so this book is based a lot of both my research and my experiences with them, and trying to share that perspective of witchcraft to the world.
Well, we do have on two of our co-hosts are mediums.
Oh,
and
cool.
They're very good mediums, and so they speak very often to those who have passed over. And do you have that in your book about how to communicate?
It's a little bit about it. Really, the kind of speaking with the dead that people have known, what we call the beloved dead. We talk a little bit about the different types of beloved dead, and we get a little bit more into the rituals and ceremonies that have been forgotten, how to build an ancestral altar and why you build an ancestral altar, and talking about the dead that are just not the people that you knew in life that you loved, but the dead of the people who were buried in the land that you're at right now, in the town that you live in, and the dead of people you identify with who you might never have met. The dead that are inspired, their stories inspire you, and the dead of your spiritual traditions. So there's a little bit of mediumship in there, but it's not a book on how-to mediumship. It's the strongest mediumship in the book is mostly in working with the mighty dead, and doing that, we do that more through visionary ritual. So there's certain images we focus on to connect with them that we feel that kind of brings them to us, just the way that a Catholic might pray to an icon of a saint to really connect to that energy, or a Buddhist will really look at a statue of a bodhisattva. So we don't really quite have that same type of artwork, but we've got stories and imageries about the witches' sabbat, and about the grove of the witches, and the kind of dancing around the pillar of fire at the great sabbat. And it's almost like an image, kind of in the East, they have the idea of the enlightened masters in Shambhala. In the witchcraft traditions, the idea that there's kind of an eternal Sabbath going on in the woods where it's beyond space and time, and all the witch masters have gathered. And if you use that imagery, you can connect to them too, just like meditating on a mandala of Shambhala can help you get there.
Well, and I want to mention to our listeners that, you have written so many wonderful books, and they can go on the Psychic Access Talk Radio guest page, and they can check out. We've listed all your books there. They're all there.
Cool.
So
Thank
that
you.
everybody could see, all these wonderful books that you've written. Well, Christopher, we're getting to the end of the interview, and I want to say thank you and merry meet.
Thank you, Mary Mead, as well. It's been
And,
fun.
I have a great deal of respect for your knowledge, and I appreciate you sharing your insights with us tonight. And again, I want to say for more information or to make contact with Christopher Penczak, visit his website at www.christopherpenczak.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers. Get access. Psychic Access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.